Hey Chevra, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 30. We start talking about like different things you can make an Eruv with, and then we get into like Nadarim and stuff, and then we get back into like the things you can make an Eruv with, like wine, and can a Nazir use wine? Can a Yisrael use Truma? Like that kind of stuff. We're going to start at Chav Tesamud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Amar V'Yura Amar Shmuel Kol Shu Lifton Kedei Lechol Bo. So anything that is like something that you eat with bread, so enough for that amount that you'd eat with bread. So for example, in my mind, like let's say you have tchina or something. So you don't need to have necessarily enough tchina to fill you up. You have to have enough tchina that you would eat with bread at 2 sudas. So if you're making your Eruv with tchina, so you just need enough tchina that, to eat with, however much you would have to eat with your bread. But if it is not something that you eat with bread, i.e. it's like a main course, like, let's say it's, pizza, although pizza is, I guess, mizonos anyways, but, let's say it's, soup, I guess. So then just like enough soup to eat. So then basar chai, if it is raw meat, kedei lechol emenu, so then you have to have enough meat to like eat the meat. Okay, sartzali, if it's cooked meat, interestingly, so Rabba Amar kedei lechol bo. So the assumption is that this roasted meat was specifically eaten with bread. So Rabba said, so if you have this roasted meat, so it would be enough meat to eat that you would eat with your bread. For Rav Yosef, whereas Rav Yosef says that roasted meat, it would be enough, you have to have enough meat in order that's going to be your main thing, which is more than if you were going to eat it with bread. So Rav Yosef and Rav Yosef says, how do I know that when it comes to roasted meat, it's enough that you would eat the roasted meat as a whole meal? Because the Persians, they eat they eat roasted meat, and they eat it without bread. And because the Persians eat roasted meat without bread, so therefore, that's going to be a larger amount, because you're not eating bread with it, so you need more of it. So because the Persians eat the roasted meat without bread, so therefore when it comes to an Eruv, we're going to require an amount that, that if you were eating this roasted meat without bread, as if it was your main course, which is a larger amount. Abai says to Rav Yosef, he says, but are the Persians the majority of the world? Why just because the Persians eat their meat without bread, do we have to assume that everybody, do we have to make our halachas assuming that you're going to be eating meat without bread and require you to bring more, to have more meat? But we have a brisa that we learned in Masechta Shabbos about the minimum requirements of a size of cloth that will be mekabel tuma. We say that for aniyim, it's 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, because for them, they will be makbid on that amount, that small amount of cloth. But for wealthy people, the minimum size would be larger. It would be 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim, because anything less than that, they wouldn't consider significant. However, when it comes to poor people, you wouldn't define the minimum size of a cloth by the same definition of the wealthy people, i.e. for poor people, it remains at 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, even though it would be a larger share by the wealthy people, i.e. each person within his context. For poor people, the cloth is defined by 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. By wealthy people, it's defined by 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim. And therefore, Abai is arguing that I don't care that the Persians eat their meat without bread. Good for them. Meaning we don't eat meat with bread, and therefore, the Persians don't eat meat with bread. We do eat meat with bread. And therefore, you're going to eat less meat when you're eating it with bread. And therefore, for the Eruv, you shouldn't need to have, as not enough meat as though that was the only thing that you were eating. Maybe you'll say that that's not a good proof from the finger breadths, because there, by saying that the aniyim we treat individually, we're actually being more machmir, to say that it's already that the cloth is ready makabel tuma when it's 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. So maybe we're willing to look at them within their own context when it's a chumrah, but over here, by looking at this situation within its own context, i.e., that, well, we only eat meat with bread, well, it's going to end up leading to a kula, which is that you don't need as much meat for your Eruv. Ve'atanya, but we learn in a brisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer ma'arvin l'cholev v'lezaken kedei mizono, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that you can make an Eruv for a sick person or for an older person, however much they eat, i.e. they eat less, and therefore the Eruv can be less. So we see that we can look at individuals when it comes to an Eruv and define the quantities of food that they need for their Eruv based on how much they personally eat. And therefore, Rav Yosef, it would make sense to say that since we only eat meat with roasted meat with bread, so therefore we should require less of this meat. And then interestingly, in kind of a curveball, Rav Shimon ben Elazar also says that somebody who eats a lot of food, so you wouldn't require him to have like a really big meal as his Eruv. Rather, he can have just like the size of a regular person's meal, which is shtickle curveball. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But for our point right now, the point is that a chole and a zaken can have less food since they eat less food, and therefore it would make sense to say that just like we look at the chole and the zaken in their context, so here also in the context of meat, look at us in our context, which is that we eat this roasted meat with bread, and therefore we should require less of it. Kasha, it's a kasha on Rav Yosef. Now, Reb Shimon ben Elazar hachi, does Reb Shimon ben Elazar really say this? What is this? The Gemara is right now focusing on that second part of Reb Shimon ben Elazar's statement, which is that a gluttonous person would only require food like a person who eats just a regular amount would require for their meal, and we wouldn't say that since he is a gluttonous person and eats quite a large amount, we should require him to have an Eruv that is quite large. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that we don't say that. He can nonetheless have a regular sized meal. So, Be'atanya, but we learn in a brayso, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Reb Shimon ben Elazar himself says, Og melech habashan pischo kimlo, that when it comes to Og melech habashan, he would have to fill up a doorway. What does this mean? So this means that if you have a house, and in the house is a dead person, so now the thing is that dead person is going to have to come out of the house. It's something that's called sof tuma letzeit. Now, so let's say you have 2 rooms in the house, one in front of the other, and the body's in the back room. So also everything in the front room is going to become tamei because inevitably the corpse is going to have to leave the house by way of the front room. Therefore, everything in the front room is tamei as well. Now, let's say you have a room in the house and it's surrounded by other rooms, let's say, and the corpse is in the middle room. So then all the entranceways and like there are little entranceways into all the room. They're all less than 4 tefachim. So then all of the rooms are going to be tamei because we don't know which hole we're going to expand in order to be able to get the corpse out. So therefore they're all tamei. But if one of them was 4 tefachim wide, so then you can assume that is the one that you're going to expand to take out the corpse, and that room that 4 tefachim wide opening opens up into is going to be tamei, but the rest of them are going to remain tahor. Now, but Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that if this wasn't a regular corpse, if it was Og melech habashan, well then, even if you have one opening that's 4 tefachim large, it's not really going to make a difference because Og melech habashan was really big and he's not going to fit through that 4 tefachim wide opening. So we see that Reb Shimon ben Elazar seems to say, at least in this context of Tumas HaOel, that it looks like we look at everybody on an individual basis. And if Og melech habashan is really big, well then 4 tefachim hole won't cut it. You're going to have to need a really big hole. And therefore, therefore, the Gemara says, I don't understand why Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that when it comes to the Eruv, this person who eats a lot can get away with just a middle-sized meal. So then the Gemara says, but Amar Abaye Hasam Eicha Le'avid Hadumi Nehadme V'nafke. So Abaye answers, yeah, but don't bring a proof from the Og melech habashan thing, because over there, that's a unique situation. We don't really have a choice. Like, how else are we going to get him out? There's only a tiny little hole, and he's a big guy. So what, are we going to cut him up into little pieces and take him out? No, we're going to have to open up a bigger hole, and there is no current hole that suffices. So therefore, we don't have a choice, and that's why we have to say that unless there's a hole that Og Melech HaBashan can fit through, well, it's going to remain tameh. Even though in general, the amount, all the holes are going to be tameh. Even though in general, we would say that as long as it's 4 tefachim, we would assume that we're going to use that one. However, in the case of Eruv, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar can say that, look, even though this guy eats a lot, we can give him the Beinoni amount of food for the Eruv. Now, the Gemara wants to know, Ibailu, Pligi Rabbanan Alei Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar o lo? Do the rabbis argue on Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar or not? I.e., what would they say when it comes to Og Melech HaBashan? If there's a 4 tefachim hole, would they say that would they say that you can assume that you can open up that one? Or would they say that since it's not the size of Og Melech HaBashan, then we can't assume that you're just going to open that one and maybe they're all tameh. Now, honestly, I don't really understand the Gemara's answer, because the Gemara's answer seems to be what we were assuming all along, and so I don't know. So Tashma, come in here. So we see that Rabbi Yochanan is saying that even when it's Og Melech HaBashan, as long as there's a hole that's 4 tefachim big, so then you can assume that we're going to take him out of that one. We're going to open up that one and take him out of that one. So we see that even with Og Melech HaBashan, so if there's a hole that's 4 tefachim wide, you can assume that he's going to go out of that one, which is unlike Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that even if there's a hole that's 4 tefachim wide, you cannot assume that we're going to take out Og Melech HaBashan through that hole. So we see that the rabbis do argue on Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So Hasam deika psachim ktanim tuva v'ika chad havarba devade ki kamarvach ba'u kamarvach. So Gemara says no, actually it's no machlokas. In that situation, it's talking about where there were like smaller holes, and then one of them was 4 tefachim, and that's why we're assuming that we're going to take out Og Melech HaBashan through that 4 tefachim hole. I don't know, but isn't that what we were assuming up until now? And we're saying that the rabbis argue with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So I don't really understand how this says that they agree. It doesn't make sense to me. Okay. Amar Rav Chia bar Rav Ashi Amar Rav. It says Rav Chia bar Rav Ashi in the name of Rav, Ma'arvin b'basar chai. So you can make an eruv with raw meat. Alright? Cool. Amar Rav Shimon bar Chia, Ma'arvin b'beitzim chayus. Says Rav Shimon bar Chia, you can make an eruv with raw eggs. V'chama, how much raw eggs? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Sinai Amar Shtaim. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said that Rav Yosef said that you can use 2 raw eggs for your eruv. So the Mishnah had said that somebody who makes a neder and says that he's not going to have any mazon, well then that means that he's basically not allowed to have any food other than water and salt. So melech b'mayim udilo ikri mazon, akol mile ikri mazon. So that sounds like okay, so the only exceptions to mazon are water and salt. Everything else is considered mazon. Let's say that this is a kasha for Rav and Shmuel that we saw in Masech Brachos. To Rav and Shmuel, the Rav and Shmuel say that the Bremine Mizonos, i.e. mazon, is only the Chamesha Saminim. Nothing else would be considered mazon. The Gemara says, didn't we already ask this question on them from somewhere else? Like, why are we asking them a question? Why are we questioning them again now? So let's say that, well, because this is still also a question on Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara answers, no. Our Mishnah, when it says that somebody who's no there min hamazon, it means somebody who says kol hazan alai, somebody who says that anything sustaining, I'm not going to have any anah from. And therefore, sustaining is basically anything other than water and salt. However, if we're talking about mazon, what's something that like really fills you up and satisfies you? Well, that is only the chamesha mine dagan. Okay? But one second, really anything that, right, everything other than water and salt is considered sustaining? Said Rabbi Bar Chana, this is a Gemara in Brachos and Daf Mem Daled, Ki azilna basrei de Rabbi Yochanan l'meichel peri de ginosar, that when we would go after Rabbi Yochanan to eat the fruits of ginosar, ki havinan be mea haviman aktinan l'chochad v'chad asara. when we were 100 people, each person would collect 10 of these fruits. When we were 10 people, each one would collect 100 fruits. So for a total of 1,000 fruits. And you would need like this really big basket in order to put these fruits in there. And Rabbi Yochanan would eat all of them. And he would say, I can swear that I didn't have anything ziyuna, which is zan. So we see that these peros ginosar are considered that they're not zan. We just said that everything is zan other than water and salt. Yet Rabbi Yochanan seems to be saying that peros ginosar are not zan. So ima mizona. No, I'll say rather than ziyuna, rather say mizona, i.e. that he ate all these fruits and yet it wasn't mazon, because mazon is only the chameshes mine dagan. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rab, Shavua shelo ochal kikar zo ma'arvin lo ba. So says Rav Huna in the name of Rab that if a person swears that he's not going to eat this bread, well, he can nonetheless make an eruv with it because other people can eat it. Just like we said that like a nazir can make an eruv with wine because other people could drink it. So kikar zo alai ein ma'arvin lo ba. But if he says I'm not going to get any hana from it, well then you can't use it for an eruv. Meaning if he says he's not going to eat it, so he won't eat it, somebody else can eat it. But if he says he's not going to get any hana at all, well, using it for an eruv is considered hana. So somebody who makes a neder from a loaf of bread. Now, it's unclear what this means. It's unclear if it means that he says he's not going to eat it. It's unclear if it means that he says that he's not going to get any hana from it. Bichlal. So we're trying to figure that out and ask a question. It's going to lead to a shtickle mess. So, my lab, to Amar alai. So mistam, what this means is that he said alai, right? And he's saying that he's not going to get any hana, and yet we're saying that he's allowed to use it for an eruv. So it's a kasha of Huna. Lo de Amar zo. No, it means that he says zo, meaning that he says that he's not going to eat this piece of bread. Hachina mistavra, and it also makes sense to say this. The Katani Seifa, it says in the Seifa of the Brisa, Eimasai, when do we say that he's allowed to use it for an eruv? Bisman Shamar Shavua shlo at amena. Right? If he says, I'm not going to taste it, Aval Amar alai mai, but what, now the Gemara says, what if he would have said that I'm not going to get any ana at all? So achinami te'en ma'arvin lo ba. So I will say that you cannot use it for an eruv, just like Rav Huna in the name of Rav. But then the Gemara says, 1 second. So remember, all the Brisa had said so far is that if you say that you're not going to get hana from a loaf of bread, you're nonetheless allowed to use it. And we said that it means that if you don't taste it. We didn't explicitly say that, if he says he's not going to get hana, then he's not allowed to use it. All we really said is that if he says that he's not going to taste it, then he's not going to eat it, then he's still allowed to use it. We didn't explicitly say, but if he says that I'm not going to get any hana from it, then he's not allowed to use it. So now, here's the question, that when the Brisa continues, it goes into some details, and it says that if he makes it hektish to the Beis HaMikdash, then he's not allowed to use it. Right? So, well, the Brisa then continues and goes into more detail and says that if he makes his bread into hektish, then he can no longer use it for an eruv. Well, because you don't make an eruv with hektish, meaning the Brisa has no problem going into details about when you can and cannot use this bread for an eruv, right? It says, look, if you say that I'm not going to eat it, so then you can still use it. And then we say that, but if you make it into hektish, well then you're not allowed to use it for a eruv because you can't make an eruv with hektish. But if we're going to extrapolate that there's an additional case where you can't use it, and that is when you say that you're not going to get any hana from this loaf of bread, well, how come the Brisa doesn't say it? Right? The Brisa has no problem saying that when he makes it hektish, he can't use it. So why doesn't it also then say, if what we're saying is correct, so the Brisa should also say that if he says he's not going to get any hana from this loaf of bread, he can't use that for an eruv either. So, Rav Huna will say, Elamai, Kolei Damar Alei Ma'arvin. So Rav Huna says, but wait, so what are you trying to say? You're trying to say that if he says that he's not going to get any hana from the bread, then he would be allowed to use that as an eruv, but kasher reisha. But what about the reisha? The reisha says that Dafki is allowed to use it as an eruv when he says that he's not going to eat it. But that implies that if he says that he's not going to get any hana, then he would not be allowed to use it as an eruv. So the Gemara answers, the Gemara answers that actually that Brisa is missing a few words, and this is what it means to say. Hanoder min akikar, somebody who makes a neder that he won't get in any ana from this loaf of bread, ma'arvin lo ba, you can use it as an eruv. Va'afilu amar alai, and even if he says upon me, that he's not going to get any ana from this bread, he could still use it as an eruv. Naisek omer shvua shlat hamena, because it's as if he said that he's making a shvua that he's not going to taste it, which we said is you could still use it. So we see that what the Brisa is saying, that if he says that he's not going to taste this bread, or even if he says that he's not going to get any ana from this bread, you can still use it as an eruv. When can you not use it as an eruv? When you make it hektish. Fine. So we see it's a kasha of Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said that if he says that he's not going to get any ana from the bread, he's not allowed to use it as an eruv. But over here we're saying that he can. So Huda Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Huna says like Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanyas, we learn in the Brisa, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Shvuah lo ochal kikar zo, ma'arvin lo ba. Rabbi Eliezer says, look, if a person makes a shvuah that he's not going to eat this loaf of bread, so you can use it as an eruv. Kikar zo alai, but if he says that he is not going to get any ana from this loaf of bread, well then ein ma'arvin lo ba, then you cannot use it as an eruv. So we see that Rav Huna holds like Rabbi Eliezer, who says exactly that if he says that he's not going to eat this loaf of bread, you can use it for an eruv. If he says that he's not going to get any ana from it, then you cannot use it as an eruv. Did Rabbi Eliezer really say this? We're learning a Brisa. This is the rule. Adam oser atzmo be'ochel ma'arvin lo ba. If a person says that a certain food is going to be asur upon him, i.e. he's allowed to eat it in general, he just decided that he's not going to eat it, well then you could still use it as an eruv. Ochel anes or lo adam in ma'arvin lo ba. But if it's something that is asur to a person, such as hekdesh, right, nobody's allowed to eat it, so then you cannot use it in your eruv. Rabbi Eliezer, Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer kikar zo alai ma'arvin lo ba, that if a person says, I'm not going to get any ana from this bread, this loaf of bread, you're nonetheless allowed to use it as an eruv. Kikar zo hekdesh ein ma'arvin lo ba, lefish ein ma'arvin behekdeshos. But if he says that this bread is hekdesh, then you can't use it as an eruv. 1 second. We just said that Rav Huna is holding like Rabbi Eliezer, that if a person says that he's not going to get any ana from this loaf of bread, so then he is not allowed to use it as an eruv. Yet we just quoted Rabbi Eliezer as saying that if he says he's not going to get any ana from this bread, you can use it as an eruv. So So the Gemara says it's just two Tanaim explaining the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So Rav Huna holds like that Tana who said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, that if you say that you're not going to get any ana from the bread, you cannot use it for an eruv. Ma'arvin l'nazir b'yayin v'chulei. So we said that a nazir is allowed to make an eruv with wine, even though he's not allowed to drink wine. Masnisin zlo beis Shammai. So it sounds like our Mishnah must not be like beis Shammai, which I guess kind of makes sense. We don't generally hold like beis Shammai. The Tanyas we learn in the Brisa beis Shammai omrim in ma'arvin l'nazir b'yayin u'lisol b'truma, that beis Shammai says that you're not allowed to use wine for a nazir for an eruv, and also a Yisrael can't use truma. Beis Hillel says that you are allowed to use wine for a nazir's eruv and truma for Yisrael's eruv. Amr lem Beis Hillel v'Shammai. Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, "Iyatem modim she ma'arvin legadol b'yom kippurim." So Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, don't you agree that a gadol is allowed to make an eruv on Yom Kippur and eruv tchumen? So obviously this gadol, this adult, cannot eat the eruv tchumen on Yom Kippur because it's Yom Kippur, but a katan can, and therefore, since somebody else can eat it, so you can make this eruv on Yom Kippur. Amula and aval, and Beis Shammai says, yeah, we do agree that a gadol is able to make an eruv tchumen on Yom Kippur, even though he himself can't eat it. Amula and kshem shmarvin legadol b'yom kippurim kach marvin lenazir b'yayin v'sel b'truma. So Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, no. So take it to the next step, which is that just like a gadol is allowed to make an eruv on Yom Kippur, so therefore, even though he can't eat it, so let's say that a nazir can make an eruv with wine, and Yisrael can make an eruv with truma. So the Gemara says no, it's different. Beis Shammai is going to argue that at least when it comes to Yom Kippur, even though he can't eat it on Yom Kippur, he was able to eat it before Yom Kippur, right? Before Yom Kippur started. Meaning it's not something that's inherently always asur to him, which is not the case by wine for a nazir and truma for Yisrael. They're never able to eat these things. Well, this is interesting, right? Beis Shammai seems to be saying they don't seem to have an issue with making an eruv right, in Eruv Tchumen, that, they say that, for example, a gadol is able to make an Eruv Tchumen on Yom Kippur with a little bit of food. Okay? That sounds like it's not like Hananya. Tanya Hananya Omer, Kol Atzim Shal Beis Shammai, Lo Hayu Modim Be'eruv, Ad Sheyotzi Mitasav V'chol Klei Tashmishu L'Sham. So, Hananya says that Beis Shammai's opinion is that in order to use an Eruv Tchumen, it's not enough to just do like a little hack to like put a little food there and then it's like you're spending Shabbos there. No. If you're spending Shabbos there, spend Shabbos there. Bring your bed there, bring a table, bring food, live there for Shabbos and then travel wherever you want from there. That's where your house is. But according to Hananya, Beis Shammai's opinion is that if you want to have an Eruv Tchumen, you gotta mamish set up shop and go camping dartin for Shabbos. So Kaman Azla, so once again, okay, so it's not like Hananya. Kaman Azla Haditanya, like who does the following brisa go like Eruv b'shchorim lo yetze b'levanim. So another way to make Eruv Tchumen is rather than leaving food there, you can actually show up at the location where you want to be spending Shabbos, and when Shabbos starts, you'll be at that location, and then you can walk back home after that. But because when Shabbos started, you were at that location, so it's like that is where you are spending your Shabbos. And what the Gemara, what this brisa is saying is that if when Shabbos started and you were at your Eruv Tchumen location, you were wearing black clothing, well then don't, the next day when you're traveling, don't be wearing white clothing when you pass there, because then obviously it's a hoax. Meaning, if when you're starting Shabbos at this place, you're wearing black clothing, well then, wear that same clothing the next day so that it's not obvious that you just like went home and changed your clothes and like you're not really spending Shabbos at the place that you said you were spending Shabbos. If he was wearing white clothes when he went to make his Eruv, then the next day when he goes traveling, he shouldn't be wearing his black clothing. Come Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Chananyahi, Bali with the Beis Shammai. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that would be Hananiah's opinion according to Beis Shammai, because according to Beis Shammai, it's not, you really have to have a significant living there, and therefore part of significant living there, that's where your clothes are, and therefore demonstrate that you're wearing the same clothing that you were wearing when you made Shabbos over there. But according one second, according to Hananiah's opinion in explaining Beis Shammai, it's enough to just wear the same clothing. I thought they said that you mamish had to like set up shop over there, bring your bed there and your dishes and things like that. So, meaning we wanted to say that there's a brisa that says that when you were sitting in this location when Shabbos started, you were wearing white clothing. Just make sure that you wear white clothing the next day when you walk there. As long as you do that, then that's fine. We want to say that's Beis Shammai's opinion because they say that you have to take it a little bit more seriously. But that's not serious enough according to Beis Shammai. According to Beis Shammai, you have to have like your bed and all your dishes and stuff like that. So Achi Kamar, this is what we're saying. Erev b'levanim b'hutzrach l'shchorim. If a person made his Erev and he was wearing white clothing, and then he realizes like, I need my black clothing. I didn't take that. So then he can't even go out with his white clothing. So come on, Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak Chanani v'liba de Beis Shammai. It's Chanani according to Beis Shammai. Meaning according to Beis Shammai, they take it to such a degree that not only do you need to have your bed and all of your clothing and dishes and stuff like that. If you realize that you forgot like your clothing that you normally wear on Shabbos, then you clearly didn't take everything, and this Eruv is null and void, and you can't go anywhere. Okay. Sumcha says that you are allowed, right? That meaning the Mishnah had said that a Yisrael is allowed to make an Eruv with truma even though he can't eat it. So Sumcha says no, he would have to use chulin. So now ve'ilu l'nazir b'yayin l'palag, but he doesn't have an issue with a Nazir using wine for his Eruv. So why does he have an issue with the Yisrael using chulin for his Eruv? So no, why does he have an issue with Yisrael using truma for his Eruv? So my taima efshir demachan zirusei. So the Gemara says, well, because Sumchus doesn't have an issue with a Nazir using wine because he can always just go and do Ataras Nadarim, and then if he does Ataras Nadarim, then he can drink this wine. So Yachi Truma Nami efshir demitchel ilave. Well, this truma also you can always just make it not truma anymore. Do Ataras Nadarim. There are ways to make truma not truma anymore. So imachil Allah hajalativla. Yeah, but if you would make this truma not truma anymore, well, then it would just revert to being tevel, which doesn't help you much because you still can't eat it. So velifrosh Allah mimakom acher. Yeah, but why don't you do this? So theoretically, Yisrael can take this truma, and then he can make it not truma, and then it'll be tevel. But then you can also say, like, I have some other produce in my house right now, I'll make that truma, and then this will now no longer be tevel, and he can eat that. So nechdu chaverim litrom shlomim amukaf. So my answer is but the Talmidei Chacham don't do that, right? Meaning, this isn't something that we want to recommend, that a person should unmake this truma, so it's no longer truma, now it's tevel, and then say, I have some other stuff somewhere else, let me make that truma, and then this I can now eat. No, usually we generally recommend making truma, separating truma for something that is very nearby. V'lifrosh ala minei uve, but still, okay, so still, fine. So you make it untruma, now it's tevel, so just separate truma from this tevel now, and now you can eat this. It's no longer tevel, meaning take a look at the food that you have and just separate truma from that. So, delays beishiur. So Gemara says, but there's not enough food. He had exactly mazon shtei sudis. Umi paska, and the Gemara says, who says he had exactly mazon shtei sudis? So ela sumchu savela karavan da amre kodavishu mishum shvus gazu alav ben hashmashos. So rather, sumchas holds like the rabbis who say that anything that is a shvus, you can't do ben hashmashos either. So meaning, what's an example of a shvus? An example of a shvus is separating truma on Shabbos. So what this means is that if he were to theoretically take this truma and make it untruma, then make it tevel, well, in order to eat it, he would have to separate truma, and you can't separate truma on Shabbos or even during Ben Hashmashos. So basically, there's no way that he would be able to eat this food on Shabbos, this Erev. Like, who does the following Mishnah go? So there are certain things that are relative to different people, meaning their share is going to be different based on the person. What does this mean? So for example, So for example, when it comes to a korban mincha, flour offering, so it says that the Kohen takes a fistful. Now, that fistful could end up being a different amount based on the Kohen's hand, right? Also the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, so he takes a fistful of incense. Depends how big his fist is. We say that somebody's chayav if he drink on Yom Kippur, if he drinks a melo lugmav, a cheekful. Everyone's cheek is different. With mazon shtei sudis le'eruv, as well as the food of 2 sudis for an erev, it depends, what you eat and how much you eat and stuff. So come on, Amar Bzer sumchusi. So Bzer says, well, it's like sumchus. The Amar mai dechazi leba'inan. Right? It's like sumchus, who says that a person has to actually be able to consume the food that he's eating. So, for example, a Yisrael would be unable to make a erev with truma because he can't eat that. So here also, so we see, that the erev food is relative to the person. So we see that this brisa, which said this Mishnah that says that things are relative, and it gives an example of erev, that would be like sumchus. Lema plige ad Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Let's say that this argues on Reb Shimon ben Elazar. The Tani Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer ma'arvin l'chola v'lezakin k'dei mizonu v'leraftan b'suda beinunis shokol adam. So let's say that this concept of having the erev being, relative to whoever the person is. Let's say it's not like Reb Shimon ben Elazar that we quoted earlier, that he says that for an erev, you can make an erev for a chola and a zaken based on what they eat, i.e. less amount. So that would be fine. That would fit in, right? We're saying that they eat less, so you can have less for an erev. But he says, however, for a person who eats a lot, we don't say that he needs to have a really big erev. He can just have a regular kind of erev. So what's the deal? So Reb Shimon ben Elazar sounds like he's not necessarily into saying that erev sizes are relative, because if that's the case, then the guy who eats a lot should have to have a really big meal. So Targuma Achola v'Zaken. So say, but at least the sick person and the older person can make sense with Reb Shimon ben Elazar, because he says that they can eat less. But when it comes to a person who eats a lot, well, he's not, a typical case, and therefore he can just go by the regular meals that people generally eat, and even though he's an exception to the rule, he can go by the rule. Fine. The Mishnah says that you can have a Kohen can have an erev in a beis hapras, which is a field that has a dead body somewhere in there, so it's a suffix tameh. So generally Kohens don't go in there, but we're saying that a Kohen can nonetheless make his erev tchumen over there, And we're saying that it can work even according to sumchus. How come? The Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, a person can kind of like blow away the dirt in a base apras and then walk, right? Meaning, this Kohen can just kind of basically make sure that he doesn't see any bones there, and then as long as he doesn't see any bones, so then he can assume that that's not where the dead body is, because the dead body is there somewhere, he doesn't know exactly where. Rav Yehuda bar Ami Mishmei de Rav Yehuda Amar. Interesting. Rav Yehuda bar Ami is the one that Rav Zera would sit outside of his base medrash, and we see that he was a student of Rav Yehuda, as was Rav Zera. So Amar beis apras shenidash tahor, that if you have a beis apras that like lots of people walked on it, well then it becomes tahor. So we see that there are ways to basically be able to carry for a coin to be able to go into beis apras, and therefore you can make an eruv tchumen even if you're a coin in a beis apras. That was the aflamed of Masechta Ayruvin, and so the beginning it was basically a combination of a few complicated things, making different things that you can use to make an eruv, foods for an eruv, and also nidarim, and like how that applies to mazon and eruvs. And who can make eruvs with what kinds of foods. Peace.